You just finished up your sick beat in Maschine and you want to mix it in Logic. This is one of the things that I could not find videos to help me. A lot of times the videos that I found on YouTube were just to help the composing side of things, but what if you want to do both, where you've made your project already in Maschine and then you want to mix it and maybe even put lyrics over it, and you want to do that in Logic. So what I'm going to show you today is kind of my setup for that. If you do it differently, post in the comments, let me know. So you've opened up a new project in Logic and you see here your instrument, you're going to be creating a channel. When you go to Maschine 2, you see a couple options here. Well, you want to choose multi-output, 16 channels, but what happens if you choose stereo, and why don't you want that one, even though that can often be the default? When the instance of Maschine loads, let's say we want to go to the mixer window in Logic. We're going to have several outputs, but we see here everything's going to be coming through this channel. But if we switch it to the 16 channel output, watch what happens here. We see this little plus button, and that's going to be important for later. When you click it, it just makes auxiliary tracks, and that is very helpful for routing within Maschine into Logic. So you go to Maschine and go to the one that you want to work on. And so I just opened the one that I had shown you earlier. And if we listen to it, okay, well, number one, the BPM isn't synced up, so you might want to change that here. So let's see, it'll match. If you see, as I drag it up here, it's gonna change it here because this is in slave mode to Logic. And of course, one of the things we never wanna forget to do is save your project. So, and once again, if we go to play, even though there's nothing in this track, it's gonna play because of what's up here. Now, one of the things we'll do later is make it so that when you play it, it doesn't trigger these notes, because that's going to hinder us later. One of the most important things that I did not realize until much trial and error is that you can only route one instrument that's selected here per instance of Maschine into Logic. That is very important, because if you copy all the MIDI notes from your drums, but then you have this instance of Maschine chosen and you click on synth pad, all of a sudden all you're going to hear is the synth pad from Massive playing to the MIDI notes from the drums, which was one of the most frustrating things I could not figure out. Because we're talking about routing, we're trying to get these channels to play through Logic. We've added some channels here because it's multi-channel output. What we're trying to do is essentially create instrument tracks just like you'd have a MIDI instrument, but we don't want 16 instances of Logic just for these drum tracks. Or for me, it'd be 6 different instances. That would take up a lot of CPU power and is not necessary. But we do only need one instance, and then this is putting out sound through each channel, and it's being triggered by the MIDI data that is there. The sound from Maschine is coming out through that channel. What we want to do is get these MIDI notes into Logic by the tracks represented here from the mixing console. One of the first things we have to do is get these aux tracks onto this main screen. We want to create those channels here as though they're instrument channels of their own. And even though we have 6 different instruments here, or samples within Maschine, one of them can just be routed through this main channel, and then the rest can be routed out. So if we go and label these, I'm only going to label the first 3 just to show you what it looks like as we go to make these into tracks. So we're going to highlight these last 5 tracks here and create track, and what that's going to do is make them visible here. And as we see, the names are matching the channel strip names here. So if we go here and we change this to our 4th instrument, which is open hi-hat 2, and then we go back to the mixer channel, we see it's changed here, and so forth and so on. So as you're changing the names, it just makes it easier as you're working through the project to identify which track you're talking about. So if we listen to the project, all of a sudden nothing has changed. So it's still coming through. It's still coming through this first channel here because it's all getting routed through this main channel. What we want to do is map it so that the outputs of these instruments are mapped out across these aux channels. For whatever reason, these are all highlighted, so you want to make sure you only have one highlighted. So if you press Command and then on one of the names, it'll just highlight one of them. What we want to do is change the internal routing here in Maschine. And so one of the things we have to do is change the inputs. To make it clear, what we're going to do is take all the MIDI notes from this first pattern here. Remember, we're only talking about drums. We're going to take all these MIDI notes and put them into these tracks just for this first pattern. This down here is what you can click and drag to drag a MIDI, the MIDI triggers, the MIDI notes from any pattern into this project. You can also do it with audio here, but we're going to do it with MIDI. We're going to click here, drag this into Logic, and this is one of those things that I haven't been able to figure out yet why it does this, or if there's a way of making this any better. But when you drag the MIDI in from Maschine, it creates an extra series of channel strips that we see here, and we don't want any of that. We also don't need these extra MIDI regions, so we can get rid of these. And all we need are these 6. So we're just going to drag these up. And then if you right click, you can delete unused channel. And now we're left with what we need for the drums. We have this first pattern and we have the MIDI notes. But if we go to play it, it sounds odd. And what's happening is this is being triggered. And if you change the instrument, those are all getting triggered based on what is selected. And so what we need to do is change the input for these channels. When we look here in Maschine, we see we have master, group, and sound. Because we're mapping out these individual sounds, we want to have sound selected. And then if you come over here, this is the routing button. So we click that. And then we're going to go right to our input first of all. So if we go to this first kick, we want to go up to the MIDI section here, and we're going to change the channel that is triggering this, because what's happening is this is being triggered by all the channels, all the MIDI notes coming through here. That's why when it's selected, it just triggers that sound. So we're going to change this to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What we also need to do, we want to change the source to host. What I like to do to just make sure that it's not re-triggering in Maschine is actually create a new area over here, and then I just drag to the front, and then we're just going to loop through this, and we're going to listen because this has nothing triggering Maschine in it. It's empty, but these are MIDI notes that should be triggering each of these sounds. So let's see if it's working. Looks like we've mapped it out pretty well. Now what we need to do is get not just these triggering, but the outputs triggering through the aux tracks. So we go to output, and once again, we just want to select one instrument. We want to change the output from group, which is this singular channel. We want to change it to the individual track strips. So if we go here, change this to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now we're going to see that it's actually outputting its audio through here. What that helps us do is during the mixing process, we can apply plugins to the individual instruments. We can EQ just like you would anything else. And we only have one instance, so you're not overloading your CPU with all these different plugins and instances of Maschine, and it's not loading it down. All right, the next step for any of us Maschine producers is to get each different scene dragged out. Now, what I like to do is just start with the drums, or whichever is the lead instrument that we're working on right now. Now, what would happen is if we clicked on synth, the reason we have to stick with one instrument is if we'd click on the synth pad, watch what starts getting triggered. So that's why we have to have one instance being routed for each individual instrument track here. Okay, so we see this is pattern 2 again up to bar 9. So all I do is just repeat, and you just want to make sure that this matches what you see up here. And let's make pattern 2. We'll make that just like that. Now we need pattern 3, which is a little bit different. One of the more frustrating things about this process is as you bring the MIDI into Logic, it creates those instrument tracks over and over again. So once you get your patterns down, copy and paste from the patterns created here is the easiest thing that I have found to do. And delete the unnecessary tracks. And you technically don't need these, so you can delete these. I just leave them in so that when I do the delete unused tracks, they don't get deleted as well earlier on. So pattern 3 stretches out to the beginning of bar 14. After I dragged out these notes, one of the things I'm recognizing is that this snare doesn't go the whole length. We didn't have that problem over here. So when I looked into Maschine, I realized that I had started working on some extra notes out here, but ended up liking the snare to be played throughout. So you want to be careful about making sure that it matches your Maschine project. And now we'll drag those out to the proper length that we saw in Maschine. Okay, I'm realizing what my mistake was earlier in the video. I don't need to loop these out as much because they should just be moved over. We created that earlier pattern that had nothing in it so we could follow along. So now we will be matched up with this. It goes to 14 and we're at pattern 3 again. So one of the things I do just for my own sake of knowing that these things are matching up is copy and paste and just showing that it matches the scenes, even though you could just loop it through. If I go in and want to make some mixing changes later, in my head, it just makes sense to match it up by scene. And so now I'm just going to copy out the whole project into Logic so that it matches up exactly like my project here in Maschine. All right, good. So what we want to do now is get these sounds and instruments into other channel strips. Now what you can do is open different instances of Maschine, and of course that's one way you can go. But what I like to do is a lot of these are, except for the drums, these are just one instrument here. And so the patterns that are in them are still useful and the same, but I'm not going to use this instance of Maschine to be the instrument triggering it. So what I'm going to do is create a massive instance as a track here, and then just use these patterns to drag the MIDI into that region. Let's open to massive, and then just find the sound that you're using for this project. Okay, so now I loaded it in Logic, and I want to make sure that the pattern I'm drawing out is the same, matching up with this first pattern here. I'm gonna click here, drag it in, and there we go. We see that we looped through pattern 2 twice and ended right before bar 10, so we're gonna do the same with this. Okay, so we're good with that. Now all we have to do is drag these MIDI regions into the project and have them match up with the rest of the project, and slowly you're making your song, your beat in Logic, and you can color coordinate or whatever's easiest for you. Okay, so now we have our second instrument made, and then you just continue doing this for each instrument that you have here until this song slowly is reformed, but now in Logic. But remember, you can only have one instance of Maschine per instrument you have selected here. So what I often do is delete these instruments that you're not using. Like, I can do that because I have an instance of massive loaded here. I can get rid of this, just do none, and now it's not using the CPU of massive as an instance within Maschine. So that just helps your project move a little faster. Okay, now I have my entire song mapped out as MIDI notes. So one thing I forgot to mention earlier though is some of these have some processing going on, like a compressor. So if you want to, you can leave that there and then come back to it. I personally like to add plugins like a wave plugin or a native instrument plugin in my audio effects chains. But if you had something here, you could potentially just have another instance of Maschine being run with Massive in there instead. Okay, so now let's check it out. Go into play this, and want to make sure that the drums is selected for this top instrument here, and we'll play through and see how it sounds. So I realized when I did take off that compressor, just for the sake of this video, I like the sound that was there. So what you can do now is just go to audio effects, and you can mix from within here. So just really quickly, let's say I wanted to run, we'll just use a Logic compressor for now. Going to turn off the auto gain, and up here is sidechain. If you want to use a track to trigger this compressor on an instrument, just use this. And here we have instrument kick. All right, so now let's listen to the pad as it's being hit with the kick. So if we solo these, here, but that's what I do to take a Maschine project and put it in Logic Pro, routing it all so that way you can use the mixer within Logic, pay attention to levels going on in here and bounce right in Logic, and now you can record your vocals over it, and you can, once you've bounced, you can get rid of Maschine and you get rid of that CPU usage and move on with your project. So I hope that was helpful. Once again, if you have any feedback, please let me know. If there's anything that's even more helpful that you've come to find out about routing Maschine within Logic, let us know in the comments. All right, thanks again for watching.